Stephen, should we let them know that audio is working?
I believe so, as long as they can hear us now. I did give a couple.
Excellent.
I gave a couple warnings, so you sound great.
Wonderful.
Cool. Amy, hopefully you heard us there. So if you heard us, your audio is working. Should get some on-hold music, maybe some elevator music. What do you think of that, Jay?
I think people would prefer hearing us talk.
I agree. Well, that being said, I have 1:30. You want to go ahead and get started?
Let's do it, partner.
Cool. Well, good afternoon to those of you on the East Coast, and good morning if you're on the West Coast. Thanks for joining us for today's webinar, all about NCOA. My name is Stephen Shattuck, and I'm the VP of Marketing here at Bloomerang, and I'll be moderating today's discussion. And I'm joined today by my colleague, Jay Love. He's the CEO and co-founder over here at Bloomerang. Hey there, Jay.
Hey, good afternoon, Stephen.
Great to have you, as always. So for those of you who have attended Bloomerang webinars in the past, today we're going to do something a little bit different. We're going to take the next 30 minutes rather than 60 minutes to explain a service that is available to all nonprofits, and it's a service that we get asked a lot about and that we have gotten some requests to create some content and webinars around. So that's what we're going to do today because we think that service is very valuable. What's going to happen today is Jay is going to spend the majority of the 30 minutes on a presentation explaining the ins and outs of NCOA and NCOA processing. And if you're not familiar with that acronym, this is the perfect webinar for you because this is just a great introduction into NCOA, and Jay is going to explain what it is. And after he's done, we're going to jump into a Q&A session, as we always do on our webinars. So if you hear something that maybe you'd like explained further or have a question about, please feel free to send those on over via the chat window right there on your webinar screen, and I'll see those, Jay will see those, and we'll try to answer just as many as possible before the 2 o'clock Eastern hour. So one last thing, housekeeping news is be sure to stay for the end of the presentation. Be sure to stick around for the whole 30 minutes if you can, because we're going to be sharing a special offer to you listeners that isn't going to be available for a little while, at least something exclusive for you guys today. So do stick around till the end of Jay's presentation. And as always, I will be sending out the slides and a recording of the presentation, so if you do have to skip out early, fear not, you will be able to replay the entire presentation at your leisure a little later on this afternoon. So I'm not going to waste any more time. I'm going to hand it off to Jay, who's going to get us started. So Jay, take it away.
Thank you very much, Stephen. I appreciate it. And one thing Stephen forgot to mention, you've got your chat area. If you have any questions as we go along, please type them in. If it's something that Stephen can answer, he will. If it's something we would be better off answering in the course of the presentation, we'll do that and see if we can get all those answered for you even before the Q&A period starts. Well, you can see a little bit of my background there. I probably should have added one thing. Prior to my 30 years of being involved in the nonprofit sector, I spent about 7 or 8 years in the office products industry with word processing, and one of the products that we worked with was in regards to all of the mailing processes. So I go back a little bit of the ways with the NCOA processing there, so it gives me a little bit more of a feel for that. Well, today's agenda, we're going to talk a little bit about what NCOA is and what it stands for, and why you should consider NCOA processing no matter what size nonprofit you are, no matter what amount of mailing that you do. We'll talk about what makes sense there. How does NCOA processing work? And we'll go through some of the ins and outs there. I've actually got an expert standing by that actually performs our NCOA processing work with us that would be able to answer some questions. We'll go into an interactive Q&A session followed by a special offer for the customers and prospects. And I got to tell you, I started searching from the day after Thanksgiving, that Friday, good old Black Friday, and trying to find if there was any amusing stories or jokes I could say about NCOA. I can tell you after 4 or 5 days of searching, there are none on the internet about NCOA processing. So we're not going to start off with a little bit of humor. We're going to jump right into it here. So when we talk about what is NCOA, for that stands for National Change of Address. and it's a database data file containing over 160 million change of address records that have been submitted to the U.S. Postal Service via the change of address form over the last 48 months, or the last 4 years for that. So when you have somebody that is have been involved with that, what we're taking advantage of is all of those address changes that have gone into place for those individuals and help that come to life for you. So it's something that you can really take full advantage of here for that. And even if you're not using bulk mailing discounts, I'm guessing only a portion of our audience out there actually goes for discounted postal services, it can still make a big difference for you, because even if you're sending stuff out first-class postage, we'll talk a little bit about what the deliverability will be versus not having NCOA processing done, and it can make a huge difference there, particularly those mailings going out to existing donors, because we know they have a much higher response rate. So we'll talk a little bit about what that can mean for you. So it does tell you when you do the processing with the NCOA which addresses to delete. The U.S. Postal Service will tell you right up front from this processing which addresses are not deliverable, and you might as well go ahead and get those out of your database and not waste the first-class postage going out if you're going with regular postage. What it does mean too is that 17%, because that's the average amount of people, even if you are only doing this once every 2 or 3 years, 17% of the population changes every year. So that means even for that single year, 17% more of your appeal letters find their mark. And as I was alluding to, for existing donors, that can be a 10% or higher revenue raise or a rise in that, because the response rate for those is much higher. If you've got a 50, 60, 70% response rate on existing donors, making sure that your appeal letters are getting back to them will make a difference. And for all of you that are existing Bloomerang customers that are following their retention rate so closely, this will make a big difference there too, because we actually know that some of our customers are losing donors because they're just not able to communicate with them due to these address changes that are coming about. So why, further questions on why NCOA? Well, having all of your addresses up to date helps facilitate duplicate checking. For that, that's one of the main criteria that we use for the duplicate checking process, so that you can take advantage of doing that. It also, in addition to making sure that as you're adding names to your database, particularly if they're coming in from your website, if you have people signing up for events, making online donations, or just signing up for information or newsletters, the duplicate checking uses the address to help make that come to life, so you're going to have a much tighter, more accurate duplicate checking process. In addition, as you can see in the bottom half of the screen there, if you're considering using other data enhancement services, such as adding phone numbers or email addresses, or adding the birth dates, or any other things such as the clean addresses there, will make the matching for those services much, much higher, so that those will be much better for you in doing it. You'll have more phone numbers being added, more email addresses, more birth dates, if you have a more accurate mailing list in place to begin with, because the databases that we use to bring those additional functions to life for you are much, much more accurate if we can use the proper mailing address to make that happen. The NCOA processing update also involves standardizing your address formats per the U.S. Postal Service recommendations and guidelines for that. So what it gives you, besides comparing the addresses on file to the National Change of Address database, we'll talk in a minute about how it allows you to correct the existing addresses for that. As we mentioned earlier, the database for all the change of addresses is based upon records that are kept for 4 years. So bear in mind, if you have people whose address is more than 4 years old, they could have moved prior to that time, and that will not be caught during the NCOA processing. So when I get into the Q&A period, I put a couple questions that we've been asked before in there, so you can see, and that's one of them that you'll see coming up here in just a minute. So as we talked about a minute ago, the NCOA process, the National Change of Address process, doesn't just find people that are moving. It also corrects the addresses that you're putting in so that the post office can deliver them properly. And more importantly, they have to be in a certain way, in a certain format, if you're going to apply for any postal discounts. If you want any of the nonprofit bulk mailing rates for that, they have to fulfill this criteria, one of which is adding the zip +4. So in addition to correcting the proper address with such things as the proper abbreviations for street, avenue, road, etc., it also adds the proper directional items, such as the different directions of north, south, east, west, etc., but also corrects misspellings, adds the zip +4, and basically brings everything up to the full U.S. Postal Service standards for that. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that the U.S. Postal Service standards are slightly different sometimes than what we see for that. So you may want to keep an address on file that adheres totally to the U.S. Postal Service standards if you're going for bulk mailing rates, but maybe have a slightly different one if you're sending something out first class, because sometimes the way the U.S. Postal Service capitalizes things and items of that nature, people sometimes say on a first class envelope they want it to look a little bit different from there. So for those of you that are doing that, you may want to keep that in mind too, and sometimes keep two of them on file. If you claim the preferred mailing rates, the U.S. Postal Service requires that your mailing list be run through the NCOA processing within 90 days of the mailing. So you want to make sure that you keep that in mind. Some of you are only doing mailings on once or twice a year, particularly if you're just doing it once a year. You might be able to get by with doing the NCOA processing a single time, but if you're doing multiple mailings during the year and you're applying for the bulk mailing discounts, then you would want to make sure that the NCOA processing is done so you hit this 90-day window each time. The CAS summary report is provided with the cleaned addresses, and that stands for Coding Accuracy Support System, and it means your addresses have been checked for accuracy against the Postal Service and you're using an approved vendor to do that. And the important part about that is they will ask for that CAS summary report when you go for the bulk mailing discount rate for those of you that will be using it in that manner. Now, NCOA processing, some of the other sort of key things to keep in mind about that, there are times when a person has moved but the new address couldn't be returned. Sometimes people are using a P.O. box that's been closed with no forwarding address, or people have moved to a foreign country, or people have moved but did not provide a new address. So sometimes it will just let you know that the current address is no longer deliverable, but you do not have a replacement for that. So be aware that can happen. The main benefit to you, of course, is that you're saving your postage of sending something that's not ever going to be deliverable for you. So even though a new address can't be provided, this information is there to help you to know where to follow up. And the key thing I always tell to all of my nonprofit organizations that are using this is if you find out that an address is no longer deliverable and that person has been a donor, that means that it's time to reach out in some other manner to see, because obviously that's going to affect your donor retention rate. They are going to lapse if you don't do something about that. They're going to fall off your list there. So that's where a telephone visit, a use of an email, anything else of that nature, where you can reach out and see if you can save that donor and help them to be part of your organization long term, can come into play there. Okay. The other thing that you can talk about here with the NCOA is people they may or may not have moved, but a key piece of the address is missing or invalid. So the NCOA will help you find those, either correct that for you or make sure you're aware which individuals in your database are undeliverable. Again, what we used to find is once your database is above about 5,000 records, usually you can save enough if you're using first class postage to always justify an NCOA processing for that, because you're going to find the amount of undeliverable addresses that would equal the cost of doing the NCOA processing, which if you're doing just a single run of that, is somewhere in the neighborhood of $225, $250 approximately for that. Now, NCOA can also tell you if there's a secondary address that's missing or invalid too. So you've got the situation where there is some other aspect of that address that's making that deliverable that you may not have if someone filled out a form or entered that information on your website. Sometimes people, and yes, they do this, try to save a little bit of time and don't put that additional information. Or maybe the person who designed your website form did not allow for a longer number of characters to be able to be moved into your database. So sometimes we find those get chopped off, and this is a good way to go back and fill that in. Okay. So before we go into our Q&A period, I thought I would pull some of the questions that I've heard over the years and just give you some of the answers that might prompt that, and then we'll see if there's some questions that come in from some of the people that are out there in the audience for that. So Stephen, make sure and start accumulating those. If we've got some of those coming in right now, we'll get to those in just a minute here. So the first one is, will NCOA processing update my business contact information? We know how important it is to have those key contacts for your businesses and foundation addresses that you have in your database, and want to make sure you're aware that no, it does not update the key contact. This is how the business matching works. If an entire business moves, then the business files a change of address. When the NCOA processing is performed in your file and a business is found, only the business name and address is matched to the change of address record. The contact name of the individual is not included in that match, so you'll have to go back and fill that in if by chance that changes. And sometimes people just aren't aware of that. They're sending something to a business where the contact person is no longer there. So this serves as a reminder that that needs to be updated or verified every once in a while to make that come to life. Now, this is what I was alluding to a little bit earlier. I recently did a mailing with NCOA processing and still got mail returned to me. Why am I still getting returned mail? And this is an answer directly from the U.S. Postal Service. No matter what you do, you will always get a few returns. And there's a number of reasons why you'll see some of those. First of all, even though 17% of the population moves every year, we find that not everyone files a change of address. In fact, 15 to 20% of the population moves every year without filing a change of address with the post office. And I know it's very difficult for some of us to realize that and know that that's the case, but that does happen from time to time. It's possible, too, that the person may have moved, but the new address they provided was not a good address, or they moved again before you process your mailing. So that could come into play from that, particularly younger people that are just coming out of their educational experience, that sometimes the moves can happen quite regularly and quite rapid there. And then if you don't update your database regularly, bear in mind that the database only goes back 4 years. So someone may have moved and turned the change of address card in prior to the recent update that we're comparing to. So if their move took place more than 4 years ago, that would perhaps drop off that and not be found as we move into that. The next question is, do you have to use the new address provided by the NCOA? No, you don't have to, and I've had some people that because they say that they don't want certain things to be capitalized, they did not use it. My recommendation there, and that's why databases like Bloomerang allow you to have multiple addresses. If you find that you've got a large donor to do that, and see, okay, yeah, and what you'll find is when you do that, you can keep the preferred first-class mailing address and the discount mailing address both on file for you to do that. But be aware that the U.S. Postal Service, if you do go for bulk mailing rates and you're not using the address provided by the NCOA, they could come back and charge you full postage if they find a certain percentage of your mailing does not fulfill that criteria. So keep that in mind. That's one of the things that can come out of it there. So let's move into talking about how this is done within Bloomerang. The NCOA processing in Bloomerang is really a quite simple process because we use a third-party vendor. The group we use is a company called Data Perfected, who processes the standardization and NCOA updates and returns the data to us. We have worked with them on several occasions, so we've got the process down to a science so that the data comes directly out of your database They use it to work with the U.S. Postal Service, and then it's brought back in with the corrected addresses and flagging any remaining potentially invalid addresses for you to investigate later. So there can be a little bit of cleanup there, but it's usually very, very worthwhile, particularly if you're doing multiple mailings, even though they're discounted or first class throughout the year. I think you'll find the savings to be substantial there for that. So, and I've included links here, so when you get the copies of the slides, you can jump right in and click right through to those links. So with that in mind, Stephen, do we have any questions from the audience right now that we want to take?
Yeah, we do. We have a couple here, and why don't we just jump right into them. And as we're answering these, if you have any additional questions, please do send them over. We've got about 10 minutes left, and Jay will be here as a resource for you and answer any question you may have about this service. So the first question comes from Ashley, Jay, and she's wondering if we would suggest including a change service request on mailings versus an NCOA, and if there's a difference there. And I guess the problem with the change service on the mailing is there's no guarantee that it'll actually arrive to the person.
Okay, can you repeat that again? I lost you on part of it there, Stephen.
Yeah, the question is, would you suggest including a change service request on a mailing, and what's the difference between that and an NCOA?
I'm going to have to defer to my expert here. I'm not sure I'm familiar with a change service request. Yeah, neither one of us have heard of a change service request.
Yeah, maybe Ashley, if you're still listening, you could elaborate. But I think what that is when you send a mailing out and there's an actual thing on the envelope that says, "Is this still your address, or would you like to change the address?" Which, of course, that would be very different from an NCOA, where you're getting an updated address, hopefully.
Okay. Alrighty. Why don't we move on to the next question? And what we'll try to do is research Ashley's question and see if we can answer that after the session offline.
Cool. So we have a question here from Jennifer, and Jennifer is wondering if you send first class, is the return service requested at no cost? And I guess since we aren't familiar with the return service, we won't be able to answer that.
Well, it's my understanding that with first class mailing you can request that.
Okay.
I don't know whether the Postal Service has changed that recently, but that is my understanding that is the case.
Great. So here's one from Janet. She's saying, I've noticed that with the new IMB, we're getting returns for lack of apartment number. So she says there's a doorman who places mail in the apartment number boxes. So for NCOA, is there an apartment append service? Is there a way to get that apartment number?
That is included with the NCOA processing, and the apartment append is part of the process. Great.
So a couple people have asked if this only works with Bloomerang.
Okay.
So it looks like there are some folks obviously listening who aren't using Bloomerang, but NCOA is available to them at any time. Isn't that correct?
Yes. Yeah. In fact, when you get the slides, the Data Perfected link, that will take you right to their website. And this particular company that we work with works with the various other products from all the major vendors. So there's a pretty good chance, depending on what product that you're using, what database that you're using, that Data Perfected could also help you with that and would be able to perform the NCOA processing. And in most cases, that would mean pulling the data out and helping you get it back in all as part of the same process.
Sure. We know not everyone uses Bloomerang. That's okay. So here's a comment from Janet, and I think it'll shed some light on that return service. She says she uses both NCOA and change service. And change service is indicated on the envelope and notifies the mailer if an address is updated or not deliverable. So that's something that'll bounce back to them. That's pretty helpful there. Cool. Great. So here's an interesting question from Rita. She's wondering if there's a breakpoint of database size when NCOA becomes cost efficient. So she's saying her database is only about looks like 1,200 names so far. So can you be too small? Can you be too large?
Yeah, let's talk about this, because there's two ways that you could mathematically do this. You could base it on, how many addresses you have to find that are undeliverable to equate to the amount of first-class postage. But the way I always like to talk about it is you never know if that envelope that's getting delivered is going to a potential larger donor. So if that particular donor is going to be sending you back a $500 donation, you've covered 2 NCOA processes right there from that one single donor from finding one correct address. So it depends. So the way I would classify that, you probably need a little bit larger database if you're using it only on first-time direct appeal. But if you're going back to your existing donors, I think no matter what your size of your database, even down to as few as just a couple hundred to 300 records there for that, if those are existing donors, making sure that all of those get delivered, because we know for your existing donors, even if there's only 300 of them, that 17% of them have moved in the last 12 months. And if it's been 2 years, you're now up to 34% of those. I think it's well worth your while to make sure that all 100% of those are deliverable as much as possible.
Great. Well, we've got about 5 minutes left, so why don't we go to one more question, because I know we have a little bit of house cleaning towards the end. Lauren's wondering what service we would suggest for collecting and updating email addresses. So obviously NCOA doesn't get into email, but Jay, what are your thoughts on the email addresses? Obviously, when we send emails, yeah.
Okay, yeah, we'll answer that in a couple ways. First of all, gathering email addresses has to become a mindset of the entire nonprofit. You have to make sure that every single form that anybody fills out, whether it's on paper or on your website, always includes the email address, that you're always making sure to do that. I always shudder to think my wife participated for many, many years in the March of Dimes, and it wasn't until just a few years ago that the application form for being in the March of Dimes walk included your email address. They were not collecting that until just so many years back to do that. So that's a key thing to do, is to make sure if you've got a place on your website for people to make donations or to sign up to do anything at all, that it always includes the email address for you. And of course, when you're talking with people, to make sure and do that. Even if you've got at a gala, when they're checking out from buying auction items, make sure that you get the email address there. Now, in addition, as part of the, it's not really part of the NCOA process, but if you've got good valid addresses, there are email append services, and we'd be glad to provide you the pricing for that. And Data Perfected, the vendor that we work with, offers some very good high-quality email appends, and that would be the email that's associated with that address that you could add to your database to see about doing them. The other thing that you can do is, of course, I've seen organizations that have done a postcard mailing to their donors and to the people that have participated in events and all, asking them for their email addresses so that they can perhaps save that postage in future years and make that come to life. Or one of the things I've seen that's been very effective, if you send out a paper newsletter, have your mailer affix a Post-it note with a place that ask them for their email address, and gives them a way to either call a phone number, log into a website and leave it, or to just mail back the email address to you.
Great. Well, we've got one last question. Carol was wondering, are there different levels of NCOA, or is it just sort of a one level process and payment there?
The price is good for up to 50,000 records.
Yeah, right now the vendor that we work with, each processing, the price for it allows you to process up to 50,000 records. And if you do contract with them for multiple times in a year, there are some discounts that come into play for doing multiple processes. Our recommendations is to at least do it twice every year, and if it's possible to do it quarterly, depending on the number of mailings that you do.
Cool. Well, Jay, since we've got about a couple minutes left, why don't you wrap it up with our special offer?
Okay, good. For those of you, we've got two offers. For one, if you're an existing Bloomerang customer and you want to take advantage and try this, we worked it out with our friends at Data Perfected that if you would order an NCOA process between now and December 20th, that we would offer a $50 savings or a $50 coupon for that. And if you are not a Bloomerang customer and you would like to become a customer for us, we would, if someone signs up for the entire Bloomerang product, we would offer your first NCOA processing in the next year in 2014 would be on us. And that would be for anybody that becomes a new Bloomerang customer between now and the end of the year. So two wonderful offers there, and many, many thanks to our friends at Data Perfected for helping us bring those to life. For those of you that are not familiar with the Bloomerang pricing, this gives you a little bit of an idea. This is also right out on our website that you can see, but it's based upon the number of records. You get unlimited users and basically unlimited emails for the most part being used out of the system, and it just depends on the number of records you have in your database on what monthly amount that you're paying there with the various levels that you can see on the screen. So, Stephen, if there's any final housekeeping, I'm going to let you do. I see that we're approaching the 2 o'clock hour on the East Coast, so it means it's about time to wrap up here.
Yeah, we're just about there. So thanks, Jay. Thanks for taking some time to explain that. And thanks to everyone who stayed on the call and listened. Hopefully that was some new information to you and something that you found valuable. We do have 2 more webinars coming up in December. We're going to return to our normal hour-long educational format. Next week we're going to talk about content marketing for nonprofits, and the week of the 19th, Jeff Jowdy is going to join us, and he's going to talk about planned giving. So be sure to visit our website, click on resources to register for those webinars. They're totally free and totally educational. So with that, we'll wrap things up. So Jay, thanks again for joining us, and to all of you who listened, thanks for taking 30 minutes out of your day. You should be receiving these slides and a recording later on this afternoon. So look for that to hit your email inbox later. And with that, we'll end it there. Have a great rest of your day.